It's a pleasure to be here with Tom and Ross. I first met Tom 11 years ago when a film you might recognize from the image behind me called The Secret of Kells came out. He was in LA from Kilkenny in Ireland. Let me remove the cat. Uh, I did a Q&A with him, and he and his producer, Paul Young, and I all got to be friends and have stayed friends ever since. And when I saw the film, I was struck by its beauty and its originality, and also in the way uh, all the cartoon saloon films revel in being drawn at a time when more and more things have a homogenized kind of CG look. There's celebrate the line and the art of drawing in that long tradition. So welcome to Tom and Ross. This is the third film that you've done that involves Irish and Celtic mythology. And I see kind of a parallel here, and I'm curious to know if you agree with much of the work of Hayao Miyazaki. If you tell your specific story well and honestly, it seems to become universal. I'm not at all Irish, but I feel very strongly what your characters are feeling and share their adventures and enjoy them. And so thoughts on making the specific appeal to such a broad audience.
You're an honorary Irishman now, Charles.
Thank you.
You don't have to be Irish to be Irish
Microphone.
anymore. Yeah, no, you're good crack, so we'll let you be an honorary Irishman. No, do you know you mentioned Miyazaki, but I remember the first time I met you. You were the first other person I'd met who had a passion for Marcel Yankovic in the English speaking world that I'd met because we'd made Secret of Kells with the Kecskemét Film Studio in Hungary. And I was really inspired by his, Johnny Concorb and the Hungarian folk tales and stuff. So just like that tradition as well, I think
Mhm.
exactly what you say. Miyazaki, Marcel Yankovic, and like so many amazing artists around the world who draw in their own culture, but try and find the universal in it so that it speaks to everyone. I think it's always interesting to get a little peek, whether it's Son of the White Mare, which is completely like a trip, or Totoro, which is like a sweet memoir of 1950s Japan. It's an insight into another culture that makes it even more fascinating to follow the human story.
Yeah, and the thing you mentioned, the honesty, I think that's what draws it into being an emotional tale. And like, humans all over the world, we all share the same emotions. We all like can empathize with another person if we can see what they're going through. Um, so like things like history and culture and background and environment and all that can be specifics, and you might not be able to relate to that so much, but you can always relate to the human story. And what I find amazing is that you can read really old folk tales from like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, like Gilgamesh or whatever, or really old Irish folk tales from like 500 AD. And because you're dealing with like a character's emotions and like their struggles and like their friendships and falling out of friendships and all that, like we've all gone through those things, and that's what can make you empathize with that. And it's really fascinating that you can empathize with a character that was written 1,000, 2,000 years ago. It just shows that we're all on the same trajectory.
I've started reading Thomas King. He's an amazing Native American storyteller and novelist, and he's done like children's books based on Native American stories. And I'm amazed how similar it is to so much Irish folklore and myth and everything like that.
Mm.
They're all definitely connected in some way. Joseph Campbell was onto something when he talked about that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the stories that were told like back in those ages had a lesson, and you'd probably find that all of the lessons were similar. Like that all the people who were storytellers or shamans or teachers or whatever had to teach their audience certain lessons, whether they were kids or adults. And there were common lessons throughout every culture. So it's amazing the similarities, as you say, T.
There's a reinvention or a reimagining of the stories every time they're retold by a different storyteller that keeps them relevant too, which is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick background note. Tom mentioned Marcel Yankovic, who is the Hungarian animator. He was nominated for an Oscar for a short film. He did the first Hungarian features in his Son of the White Mare, which will be coming out early next year in this new gorgeous 4K restoration, is a Scythian legend, and the Hungary is the kind of western boundary of it. And it draws on this, again, a common tale in mythology of a fallen kingdom that has to be restored by the hero. The enemy's defeated, the heroine saved and married, the tree of creation sustained, and so forth. And one of the things that I learned in researching some other animated films is how many variations there are on individual stories, that the sort of thing that Tomm and Ross are talking about. There are literally hundreds of versions of Cinderella. There are a Sleeping Beauty. Beauty and the Beast is one of the most universal tales everywhere. Every culture has a variation on that. So I think Tomm and Ross are right when they say that there's certain emotions, certain passages everyone has to go through that these are tapping into.
Mm. And wasn't it said that also Shakespeare basically wrote every story, and every story since has been some kind of adaptation of that too. And I'm sure he was copying other stories like in order to write his. But
there's theories, isn't there? Like there's 7 basic plots, and there's a lot of different stories. But what I think is so interesting is when you go back to the mythology, I think we've been fixated in the Western world since Joseph Campbell on the hero's journey, but there's another stage to that cycle that, you know, Jung and different people talked about, and it was the guardian's journey, and it's after the hero comes back and he's brought the boon back to the community, and then what happens after that when they become kind of guardians of this knowledge. And I think that's a story for the 21st century, because I think we need to look to that ancient wisdom for, you know, the way forward, given the trouble and the you know, the destruction that we've seen to our biosphere and the polarization we see in society and all the pain that we're going through. I think we need to look to a kind of guardian's journey, because the hero's journey, I think, speaks very strongly to a young person, and it speaks to a certain kind of individualism that I think we need to move past now. I think we need to look for stories for the collective. And that's what I've been sort of researching more recently. I'm kind of interested in, like, what happens after the hero comes back and becomes part of the community again, and how does that work, you know?
Well, you know, that's also relates to the tales of Atlantis, that was so satisfied and so smug that they were destroyed for their pride. Plato even says at one point, the Atlanteans lived in such splendor and such content they never dreamed, which is a terrifying thought. But again, that's the question of, once you achieve that success or the quest is fulfilled, what happens?
Mm-hmm.
What's
There's
next?
a wonderful comic I've just read by Cyril Pedrosa, who made a lot of the early concept art for Wolfwalkers and kind of set us on our style. I love this comic, The Three Shadows, but he's just done one called The Golden Age, and it's set in the Dark Ages, kind of a fictional Dark Ages in Europe, and everyone's speaking about a time that they lost when, you know, before there were serfs and lords and kings, and when everyone was equal. And it's like a dangerous myth that the nobility want to press down, and it feels very relevant. And I highly recommend the comic to lovers of good artwork and good comic books as well. Cyril is amazing talent. I'm always inspired when I read another one of his books. Three Shadows, like, I drew a comic after I read Three Shadows of me reading the Three Shadows, and a big fist comes out of the pages and like punches you in the gut, because you're gonna cry when you read that book. But Golden Age is more philosophical, and it's really interesting and beautifully drawn.
Something I think the people would like to hear you talk about is being co-directors is almost like being married. And how do you put up with each other, and how do you divide up your duties so that you're playing to your individual strengths, you're both working to make the best film, but without stepping on each other's toes or overlapping effort or giving people mixed signals? It would seem to me that's a very tricky road to walk.
I think it
Well,
helps that I think it helped that Tom and myself were friends since we're 11. So like it must be hard for co-directors who just jump onto the same project and have to actually get to know each other while also, like, you know, co-directing and trying to figure out like any kind of power struggles or anything like that. But Tom and myself have been friends since we're 11, so all that stuff was figured out a long time ago, many years ago. So really, I think that was one of the reasons why we knew that we could co-direct, because we have very similar like tastes in visuals and aesthetics, in like character design and background design, everything like that. So we knew that there wouldn't be very many issues and arguments. And also we co-directed a little piece of The Prophet, the film by Roger Allers. We co-directed the segment on love. And so that was a testing ground, if there was going to be any major issues, I think that would have shown it up. So thankfully, I mean, we did have a couple of little arguments, but really, like, I think we're both able to talk about it, and I think maybe we're both in touch with our emotions enough that we could step outside of the room, kind of go, okay, like, this is what I think, what do you think, and figure it out. And like, to put it in perspective, the biggest argument was about whether Merlin should have, the little bird should have human expressions or like just bird expressions. So like, if that's the level of the worst argument ever, then I think it shows that we weren't fit to kill each other,
Yeah, we weren't on completely different wavelengths. And I
Yeah.
think visually, I've always had, since I've met Ross, he's always been just an amazing artist. And the longer we've worked together, more like, he was the one who gave me the book of The People of the Sea when I got the idea for Song of the Sea. And obviously Ross was all but co-director on Secret of Kells as art director. He'd been a big part of that project since the earliest days of its development. So we're so used to working together that, to me, the title was it wasn't like a massive change. It was very much a continuation of how we'd worked together forever.
Well, you remind me, at one point on Lilo and Stitch, Chris Sanders gave Dean DeBlois a certificate good for winning one medium-large argument, because he had conceded one point to Chris, and so he had that coupon.
But we did, I watched the making of Lilo and Stitch, and what I loved about that was how they kind of agreed together that by co-directing they were going to have time to, have a life outside of it. And, it shows Chris, because he's super sporty, having time to go and do like surfing and all that. And, Dean and him kind of had an agreement that they didn't want to totally, I mean, it's always really difficult, but they hoped that by being co-directors, they could make it a little bit easier on each other rather than harder on each other. Ross and I had similar discussions, and I thought you were going to say we reminded you of Beavis and Butthead, because I think that's who we were most like at this stage. Those two teenagers sitting on the couch, and when one goes, the other one goes, yeah.
Yeah, and like Jack in the comments says, you must be able to finish each other's sentences after knowing each other for so long. So I think definitely with these interviews that we're doing for press, I think we can finish each other's sentences. But what was really good during the direction, if Tom or myself had to take a week off, like if we had to go somewhere or were sick or anything like that, the other one could stand in, and we both were really able to trust the other one that they would give the exact same direction that we would give. It wouldn't be like you'd come back after a week and go, what did you do? Oh my God, I can't believe you made Maeve's hair blue.
Yeah, it wasn't really that, and that was what was lovely. And also, the company's grown so much since we did Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea that I had a lot more responsibilities as a company director. So it was really important that Ross was, like, if I had to go to a meeting, that Ross was able to be there with the crew like all the time and stuff. So I mean, it was really good for me to feel that I was sharing the load rather than trying to do. I don't know how Nora's doing it, but she's just some kind of superwoman. She's directing and running company at the same time. But I suppose we also did divide a little bit. I mean, at one point when production got busy, I think it was always kind of tacitly acknowledged that I would focus a little bit more on character and character posing and animation, and lots a little more on backgrounds. But it was still very much a co-direction thing, because we relied on the other one to be able to give, like, if we kind of got lost in the making of a scene and thinking it was so good, Ross had fresh eyes on it and could make sure I hadn't kind of lost the plot or gotten too kind of close to it, and vice versa with the backgrounds, I hope.
Because that was the way that we did it, even in the very initial design stage, when we had that little concept, the development room, and there was only Tom and myself in there, that Tom would be drawing like, Bill and Robin, and then I might have a little pass, but he was doing most of the character design, and then I was doing most of the environment design. And so we'd give feedback and both kind of spur each other on. So I think it just continued the whole way through.
Yeah, yeah. And early on, I wanted to really get into painting a lot more, and I always had so much like respect for how much like how good Ross was as a traditional media painter, and it was just nice because I was able to. I was just making it important that every character I did, I tried to paint it rather than go into a computer too quickly and stuff. So it was a nice little room we had going on, trying to just. Bit of a little clubhouse where we were able to do a bit of development work while everyone else was beavering away on animating the breadwinner.
Well, but the only case I know of one animation artist surprising another when they were collaborating was Roger Allers and Brenda Chapman told me when they were storyboarding Beauty and the Beast and the little song Something There, that Brenda had been working on it, had emphasized the emotion and the falling in love. And Roger was a little impatient with that and thought it was getting a little syrupy. And she was sick one day just before they pitched it, and he added the snowball fight without saying anything.
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked him about that, he sort of did a "oh, bad me" kind of expression. But having both of you worked with Roger on the breadwinner, you can imagine him doing something like that.
Yeah, but he's just such a nice person. I don't think you'd ever hold it against him. He's really one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. I just think I don't know. I think he must have been amazing back in the '60s or whenever he was in his heyday as a hippie. I would have loved to have met him back then. The stories he can tell, it sounds idyllic. And he still
But I
has a
suppose
nice chilled out Zen attitude to life. He's amazing.
if Brenda did come back and see the snowball fight and absolutely hated it, I'm sure they would have come to
Roger
some
would have listened.
compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was a
yeah.
pleasure to work with that way. He was always open and always so kind of delicate about asking for changes. He always asked in such a nice way that you couldn't refuse. But
Hmm.
yeah, Brenda, when she gave the story workshop that Ross and I were at when we first came up with the idea, she mentioned Roger and she said that she would. I hope I'm not misquoting her, but she said that she would kind of try and impersonate him in her head because she was shy and he was quite gregarious, and
Yeah.
so she kind of did a Roger Allers impersonation when she had to pitch to executives and stuff, which I thought was kind of nice
Yes,
bit.
no, she told me that same story, and uh, even Jeffrey Katzenberg said that Brenda's boards were always beautiful and
Mm.
heartfelt and really got to the emotional core of a scene, but you had to lean in to listen to her because she was very shy and soft spoken. And she said, Roger would come in his flip flops and his weird jams and his green Frankenstein green T-shirt and just become his characters. And she said, okay, I'm going to just be Roger when I'm pitching a board.
I think that might be a curse of animation people that like they're by default. I think the majority of them are quite introverted and a little bit shy, and it's usually only the kind of louder ones that actually get to pitch their ideas and get to go to the forefront. Whereas some of the people that we've worked with on Wolfwalkers, they've amazing talent and really good ideas, but they're not like maybe confident enough to kind of go, hey everyone, listen to my idea, it's gonna be amazing. So they just get kind of sidelined a little
Yeah,
bit. So
nor yeah, sorry, Ross.
yeah, just in Cartoon Saloon, I think we developed over the last few years a way to try and bring those people to the fore a little bit more and ask them if they have ideas so that they can get developed, because otherwise they might just sit there for 10-15 years and never be heard.
That's exactly what I was going to say, ironically, considering, yeah, Nora has been really the champion, because I remember a discussion with Nora about we need to start developing new directors, not just new projects in the studio, and we didn't call it like the Tom, Paul and Nora studio. We kind of called it Cartoon Saloon, so it could hold any number of directors, but that was it. We didn't want it to be the loudest voice. And I remember having a kind of, and in a way you can be passively wrong-headed sometimes, and I was like, no, if someone isn't kind of gregarious enough to pitch, then maybe they shouldn't get the opportunity. And Nora made a really good point. No, that's the system is wrong, not the people. Like, people shouldn't have to change for the system should become gentler to allow people to have space. She was absolutely right, as usual.
Well, and Nora herself is a very soft-spoken
Yeah.
person and very gentle, and so is Pete Docter.
Mm.
You could
Oh
hardly.
yeah. But Pete has gotten more, I don't know, he's kind of grown into, or maybe people have learned to listen because they know he's always got something interesting to say.
You were talking about each other's artwork, and something that has always impressed me about cartoon saloons work, because I think it reflects something I've been thinking about for a long time, and it also goes back to the idea about honesty. I don't think you can lie in a drawing. If you don't believe what you're drawing or you're animating, I think your audience is going to be aware of it on some level. They may not say, he wasn't really thinking about that. But I think you must believe in your characters when you're creating them. And I wondered your thoughts on that, following up some of the earlier things you had both said.
Yeah, I think when you do any kind of artwork, you have to have a confidence that comes from a belief in what you're doing, and I think that's kind of almost the catch-22 of struggling artists, that they have like not confident mark making or not confident ideas, so therefore people can kind of register that, and then they don't give them the due that they get. But yeah, definitely animators, I think like you have to be maybe a little bit passionate about it, a little bit interested in what you're doing, a little bit enthusiastic, at least, in order to get that kind of quality across. Otherwise, I think, yeah, the audience does pick up on the fact that like, oh, this person, when they were doing that painting or that animation or whatever, really didn't have their heart in it. I think that comes across, right? What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think confidence is something that you have to nurture, especially in young artists, because I'm always amazed. Like some of our artists, they're so humble and they're so talented. Like Maria Pareja, who was kind of like became our like co-art director. Like she was so humble, wasn't she, Ross? And like we had to kind of tell her, no, like you have to really, like you're so talented. And there's been so many examples of super talented young people like rocketing into supervisor positions in saloon, which I'm really happy about. Like Fede, well, he was pretty confident, amazing young artist when he came in, but like he came straight from an internship to being like the main character designer. So, yeah, I agree anyway.
That's the thing, I suppose. It's actually kind of following on from the 2 points that we were just talking about. That Maria, even though she was a little bit shy and a little bit quiet in her personality until you got to know her, her artwork was very confident.
Yeah.
So I think that's why in animation that like you should give the voice to the confident or to the shy people, because their artwork or their ideas might have that confidence that their personality is like is contrasting with.
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit more gregarious than a lot of people, I think. And I think it's because I feel very comfortable in the studio. Like I've been a lifer, I've been there forever. And I have to remember sometimes that the people coming in, like they're brand new. And I have to try and imagine what it's like. I just haven't experienced that. Like I've literally been in cartoon saloon since I was 22, 23. So I have to try and remember that people coming in might be a bit intimidated, which seems crazy to me because I'm usually intimidated by their talent. And, usually if they've attended Gobelin or some cool school, I'm like, oh, they're so good. But I have to remember they might be a bit intimidated too. Fede tells a story that and I don't remember this happening, but it was a wake-up call for me that in Annecy, he's also vegan like me, and he came up and said, oh, it's Wolfwalkers about animal rights and stuff. And I wasn't bothered. I was kind of busy or something, and I gave him a brusque answer, and he was like, I'll never work in cartoon saloon. And I'm so sad that I gave him that impression. But anyway, he ended up being the main character designer, so it was okay. But yeah, I'm really conscious of that now. And the other example I give is Sandra Anderson, who was like the head of model sheets and a really amazing posing artist. She was a young intern, and when she first arrived, she was so shy, and we just gave her like kind of interny work, if you know what I mean. She was doing in-betweens or something, but she would doodle on the side of her on paper on the side of her desk, and she drew the characters. I remember walking past her desk and I just went, who drew that? And she was like, I did. I went, that's great, can you do more? And then she ended up being like the main model sheet artist and a posing artist. And maybe that's the saddest thing about COVID, that if you're shy you could just disappear, because if everyone's on a Zoom call and you just don't have that interaction, I think that might be the saddest thing about not all being in a studio anymore. The shy people could get left behind if we're not careful.
But I think that speaks well for you both, that you're willing to listen and to go beyond maybe the bombast or the ego of some of the other artists. Another case in point, an artist who did a little work for your film was on Roger Rabbit. James Baxter's supervisor went to Richard Williams and said, my assistant's better than I am.
Imagine having
actually,
James Baxter as your assistant. You'd just be like, what's the famous painting of like Michelangelo or somebody, and he painted a fly on the master's painting, and he was just put down his paintbrushes. That's it. I quit.
I quit. Yeah, but James as well. Like when you meet him, he's
Very humble.
yeah, he's quite a humble and lowly spoken guy. You know, he doesn't have that big bombastic thing. So I suppose again that kind of,
Animation.
yeah, it's the animation
It was
people.
quite funny. It was quite funny because he came to the pub and he's like Elvis Presley entering the room, but all these shy animators don't all go like Beatlemania over it. They all just sit there and go, James Baxter's here. And then just slowly over the night, one by one, they got the confidence to come up and chat to him and stuff. And it was really nice because he had so much time for everybody. It was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Something you mentioned, Tom, that I wanted to ask you about was Wolfwalkers was still in full production when COVID hit. And how did that affect the film? And I remember getting the story from you about your sort of saying goodbye to your office of all those years. But what were its repercussions for the film?
Well, yeah, the room on the Sunday, on the Friday, I was talking to Catherine, who's like our kind of head of operations, and she's amazing. And she was saying, I think we're going to have to go into, work from home. And I was like, no, that won't happen. No, we can't do that. And then on Saturday, I think the government said that we had to do it. And I remember going in on the Sunday to pick up my computer, and there was a couple of people in there working, and I had my computer. I know I had my Cintiq, which is super heavy, in my arms, and I was walking out, and I just realized, gosh, we made like Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea and Wolfwalkers in that room, and we were walking out the door. It was a bit emotional, but it wasn't so. I mean, it was amazing how quickly it kind of worked. I mean, I
Yeah,
was stressed the first week, but
and when we were picking up stuff from the studio, I remember thinking that it was almost like, that question that if you had to take one thing to a desert island, what would you pick? It was almost
yeah,
like, what can I fit in my arms? What do I really need? Because I'll never be able to come back here for months and months and months. It's quite weird. But it didn't affect Wolfwalkers that badly, thankfully, because we had gotten a lot of the work done that needed like a collaborative team. Apart from compositing, the poor compositing guys had to go and work in their bedrooms and finish off what they were doing, and they really worked together well as a team. They were learning off each other. If one guy had figured out a way to do like fire or like smoke or something like that, he would call maybe some of the other guys over and they would learn. So the fact that they were all separated, that kind of team spirit did lose a little bit, and we made one attempt to gather them together and have beers with them and down by the river, all socially distanced and everything. But I think they appreciated it just to get them
yeah.
over that finish line.
I think it was scary for them because what it was that they were a team of Belgian, a couple of girls, mostly guys, who had worked on Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea as co-producers. They had Serge, the compositing supervisor, was the owner of Digital Graphics, and in between Song of the Sea and Wolfwalkers, that company dissolved, and so they were all kind of gathered to the winds. And Serge actually ended up kind of pulling them all together, like, I don't know, the A team or something, and pulled them all back together. So they'd all come to Kilkenny to work together. And I was looking forward to the stage of production where I could spend a bit of time with them, because on both previous productions, I'd actually gone and lived in a spare room in the Belgian studio and just like was there morning to night working with them to get the movie finished at the end. So I expected that to be the last stages of it. And it's funny, Apple made a little kind of promo video that they put on Twitter, and they went like, to show the stages of production, and they said storyboard, posing, rough animation, cleanup, ink and paint, final magic, which I thought was kind of amazing that they didn't call it compositing, because it really is the final magic. And I really think those guys went above and beyond from their bedrooms. And sometimes I was talking to Morgan or Damien or some of them, and you could see their bed in the background. They had just gotten up and sat and worked till the early hours and gone back to sleep, and they pulled all the elements together that are on screen. So it was huge. Yeah, it was huge what they did.
Yeah.
Well, but you had worked with artists in other studios before,
Oh,
the artists
always,
in
yeah.
Belgium and France. So did that kind of prep you two for the working at home and having everybody Zoom in or Skype in or be at a distance?
Yes, but as I said, in the co-production scenarios, anytime it was a crunch, I would go to the studios and be there with them if it was a crunch time in previous productions, and that was the difference. I couldn't, like, remember Adrian, who was the art director on Song of the Sea, and I, like, we spent a good couple of months, 2 or 3 months in the final stages, just being there every day with the team. And Adrian would make quick Photoshop examples of what he wanted, and all of that had to go to the Zoom. So yes, we were used to working over Skype and Zoom and different ways of communicating, but not usually with such a fractured, um, not with every, like, usually it would be a pod, like in France there'd be 30 animators. So you'd speak to the supervisor and the animator one by one if you were briefing them, if you weren't actually in Paris. Same in Luxembourg, we really trusted the supervisors there. Like, Nick Debray is a great animator, and so we would brief him and the animation team over Zoom or Skype if we weren't in Luxembourg, and then he would have, he could go and draw at the desk, or he could be with them. So the challenge of there not even being a room somewhere where all the compositors were was quite hard, because they were so, each in their bedrooms kind of thing.
But the one thing though I will say that did make it a lot easier to transition into lockdown was the fact that we use Shotgun, the software that allows us to see like immediately what everyone is working on, even if they're in the room or if they're in another country. Everything is uploaded, and there's all like a sequence of events that needs to happen. So you can see in real time almost as soon as someone uploads, that you can have a look at an AVI of what they've done, and you can do a draw over, and you can send it immediately back for a retake or something. So it allows you to work with people on the other side of the world, or people in their own bedrooms, very easily.
I should say, right, I don't think Song of the Sea could have been done like this, because it was so wing and a prayer, and it was so down to just, people being passionate and like holding all the knowledge and passing it on. Whereas on this, we had an amazing assistant director, Mark Mullery, and great production team. And they had kind of organized us, even within the studio, that it was kind of more a courtesy and a social thing that we would actually go and visit the artists. They had all the documentation for every scene recorded in Shotgun, and they had weirdly kind of prepped us for that without knowing this was coming, because the kind of chaos or whatever artistic kind of messiness of Song of the Sea and Secret of Kells would have been very hard to deal with COVID. But the way the guys were already very organized, I think that helped a lot.
Tom, you mentioned you basically moved into a spare room in the studio in Belgium. As my editor of the book is in our cyber audience, I have to ask you, was it a problem having an author roaming through the studio, pulling at your shirt tail and asking you questions for several days, and following you to Ross?
It was an honor, Charles. It felt very important. It felt like, wow, this is the guy who writes about, the Nine Old Men and great Japanese directors like Osoda. And so, oh, great, this is amazing. Made me look important to the staff. Wow.
One of the a thing that I remember Pete Docter talking about when he was working on Up was trying to cast the voice of Russell and finding a young actor who's believable. And I remember him complaining, there's a school somewhere where they teach kids to over-articulate and over-project and sound like they're trying to reach the rafters at the back of the Paris Opera instead of sounding like kids. And so I wonder if the two of you could talk a bit about casting your two leads, who are so good, but those are, I think, rather demanding roles for such young talent, and they don't sound affected or stagey.
Well, we made a specific request to the casting agency, Louise Kiley, up in Dublin, that we didn't want the voice for Maeve to come from those drama schools. We didn't want, Maeve to sound very articulated and eloquent and refined. She had to be this kind of like creature of the earth, living amongst the wolves. She had to sound like she was from the country. She had to have that bit of wildness about her. So Louise put a call out to all the amateur dramatics, all the school drama societies and everything all around the country to get tapes in. So while Robin could come from like a drama school in or like an agency over in England and could have that level of refinement. Maeve just had to have that that untrained kind of energy about her. So when we saw little Eva Whittaker doing her casting tape, she was just roaring into the camera. She was doing, I think, that thing of, I think I'll get me wolves to eat you. And she was, she really looked like she was going to attack the person who was recording on video. And I remember just going, oh yes, that's exactly the energy that we need. And I called Tomm over, and we were blown away, but we were just worried that maybe because she was so like amateur that she wouldn't be able to do the sadder bits or the quieter bits. So we had a second callback just for that reason. And Eva came in and she knocked that out of the park as well. So we're just like, right.
A little bit like that. There was a couple of artists where I kind of said, look, just trust me. I know it's a wild card. I'll take responsibility. And Ross was a bit like that with Eva, like, because there were so many more experienced, talented girls, and I was a bit unsure. And then as Ross said, let's just hear her one more time. And I was utterly convinced the second time. And I actually just met her today. We were in the gallery getting some photos taken for an Irish newspaper. And, you know, same thing with every child I've ever worked with. Like, you meet them and they're a little child, and then you finish the movie and they're almost an adult. You know, she's 12 years old, but she's an absolute consummate professional. And the photographer is asking her to do different poses, and she's absolutely amazing. So it was really lovely to see her grow. And it was really just in a matter of months, wasn't it, Ross? Like, when we first met her, she hadn't done anything. And by the time we were recording like the final official record with like Sean Bean and amazing actors like that, she was holding her own with the adults.
Yeah, and it was
really
less than a year after as well. It was really amazing. We had asked this guy who was working with the drama society she was in the school, if he could do a little bit of coaching, and I don't think he was really needed, because as soon as she found out that she got the part, she put so much work in herself, you know. And yeah, we even got like a little recording of her acting some of the lines in her house as well, in her home.
And I remember one time, like, we would talk to every other actor for a little bit before they do the role, and we kind of learned after a while to just ask Eva what she had in mind, because she had sort of thought about every single line in the script, and usually what she had come thinking she was going to do was every bit or maybe better than anything we had in mind. So that was great. And yeah, same with Honor, I think, too.
Well, I remember you're saying that, and the your co-writer said it too, that you wanted a very specific accent for her, and that when she pronounces mammy in a certain way, it's something, it touches some very deep root, or it's just a certain
Irish mammies, yeah.
Yeah, reminds us of our childhood.
Our mammies, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I think Will was saying that too. Yeah, it's a definite Irish thing. But then on the other hand, Honor was amazing because she was super experienced and her audition stood out. And there was a lot of talented girls, but Honor really stood out. And we were like actually just amazed how experienced she was. I think she's been acting since she was 5. I think it was the first time doing voice acting for a feature, but she'd been in live action movies with, you know, really famous actors and stuff before. So she was great. And I think she was a great kind of spiritual mentor for Eva as well. I think they had a nice relationship. You could feel that Honor, just that, as Ross said before, like, there were the 2 kids on the set with a lot of older people, and no matter what you do to make, you know, kids sort of feel comfortable and everything like that, it's still a bit intimidating. So it was lovely, their friendship that they grew over the few recording sessions. You feel it on screen, which is lovely.
Yeah, I think, Ben, we have a clip that shows the 2 girls at the microphone recording some of their lines. If we could see that, please.
I think the host has to share computer sound. Whoever's
Yeah, we're not getting
this.
the sound.
If you're hosting it, you just go up to the top and there's like a share computer sound option, I think.
How about now?
Yeah, they're there.
Can you smell me? Of course, everybody can. Well, close your eyes. Don't need your eyes to see. And you can hear every little thing that moves. They're safe and your paws go here through the earth. Don't you know we're stronger now? My heart's so beat and my sense. You have 4 legs now. You can run really fast and jump so high. And my mind's so free. Hey, wait for me. Are we running out of time? Keep your nose down. Be a wolf. I'm running with the wolves tonight. I'm running with the wolves. I'm running with the wolves tonight. I'm running with the wolves. I'm running with that. You let them out. The forest is ours and I wait till you see. I'm running with the wolves. I've done so much stuff. Hey, stop. That's the game for hunting. Oh, a hunter. Ha, a little girl like you. Well, you're a girl too. I'm no girl. I'm wolf walker. When I sleep, I'm a wolf. When I'm awake, I'm me. Man of Matira. I've done so much stuff. Hey, stop. That's the game for hunting. Oh, a hunter. Ha, a little girl like you. Well, you're a girl too. I'm no girl. I'm wolf walker. When I sleep, I'm a wolf. When I'm awake, I'm me. Man of Matira.
I think it's a pity, maybe for if we show another video, there's someone in the chat saying you can optimize, because that was a little bit like chunky, the way it played back, which was really a pity.
Yeah, but whoever did that animation of the rabbit, that's gorgeous.
Isn't it? Emmanuel is amazing. Yeah, I think, you know, James Baxter is amazing and he's a legend, but we have some talented young animators in the studio, and I'm so happy that we have a place where kind of some, you know, because it's a hand-drawn animation, it's kind of making a little bit of a resurgence, but I love that there's young artists graduating that can work in hand-drawn animation, because there's still so much talent there.
Well,
Emmanuel is one of those animators that if we had a scene where we didn't really know how it was going to work, we would let Emmanuel take it on, because he just has this amazing ability to work with really complex perspective and construction, and then also get like loads of emotion into it. He's just like, he ticks all the boxes, you know.
The other thing that's crazy about Emmanuel is that his primary qualification wasn't in animation. He'd actually studied philosophy originally. So he's there doing the most amazing animation. And his partner was one of the production managers. And they'd be having these deep conversations about philosophy while he was animating. And I was like, I have to use every single brain cell I have to do this. But you're like talking about, you know, details, anarcho-capitalist sort of concepts or whatever. Crazy.
Well, that brings up another question I had for you, is that you are kind of an island of hand-drawn animation at a time when so much of what we see is CG, and sad to say, a very homogenized kind of CG. That there are a lot of the theatrical films that we produce in this country, the characters could walk from one scene into one in another movie, and then the two of them go to a third, and you really wouldn't notice because they don't have the kind of graphic identity that I think a lot of us would like. So I'm wondering about, outside of Japan, you're one of the foremost studios who are still drawing, and what does that feel like in such a CG world?
Yeah, I think that's changing. I mean, I think Spider-Verse changed something. I think I do think what you described is a natural human reaction to fear. And when people are spending so much money and they have to make so much money back, they take less and less risks. And so everybody goes, oh, look how great Pixar are. Let's try and look like that, you know. But thankfully, I've noticed over the last 4 or 5 years, so many more ambitious design ideas. And you know, I thought that the Peanuts movie was very interesting a few years back, and obviously the Spider-Verse, and then How I Lost My Body is an example of the kind of experimentation you see in a slower budget. And I think that's kind of really interesting to see that creeping in. But yeah,
also,
I mean,
also the European films
yeah.
too. I mean, like Remy Chaillet has just made Calamity second film, and you know, like Klaus was made last year, and like then if you look at like, you know, Sylvain Chaumet's film, like there's
Big
Many
Bad
many
Fox and
hand-drawn
Ernest
films.
and
Big
Celestine.
Bad Fox and Ernest and Celestine are
Yeah.
amazing too. And Didier, our co-producer in France, kind of built a career making slightly. But my point was more that those films can afford to take risks in a weird way because they don't have the budgets and expectations that a huge studio film has. So I'm happy to see like the huge studio films starting to take more risks. But yeah, I've always valued being in the European co-production model because you don't have those terrified executives kind of forcing you to kind of blandify things, and you're allowed to take more risk. And in fact, Didier early on in my career encouraged me to go further. My character designs at the start were a little bit too, he thought, Don Bluthy or Disney-esque, and he was like, oh no, go as far as you want away from that, because you'll at least have your own identity and you won't be just inviting comparisons that you can't match. So
And one interesting thing about the co-production model is that a lot of the funding comes from, like government funding, like our tax breaks or something like that. Like it's one of the good things about the more socialist side governments. And it reminds me of like the National Board of Canada, wasn't it? The National Film Board of Canada. They allowed some amazing animations to be made back in that day as well. So I think it's important for governments to realize that if they start funding the films, start funding animation, that eventually you'll grow, an industry that can turn into something big. I mean, the animation industry in Ireland now is worth a lot of money to the government. And I think they're able to see like that, that creativity does equal more taxes for them, and so there's an incentive for them to fund it.
It's amazing, like between us and Lighthouse, which is kind of a sister studio that we co-own at Mercury, there's over 300 people working in animation in Kilkenny. And for like literally hundreds of years, Kilkenny had a brewery that employed most people, and that brewery closed down a few years ago. And so now we've kind of become the biggest employer in the center of the city, which is crazy, but it's lovely because all those animators are, in normal times buying sandwiches and pints and renting houses and part of the local economy, which is lovely,
Well, but I think it goes even beyond the immediate effects on the economy. One of the things in Japan now is that they talk about the soft power they have from anime and manga. Now people are 20 years ago, if students in America were learning Japanese, it was because they wanted to go into business and thought that was necessary. Now it's that people want to read manga and listen to Miyazaki films in the original. And so I would assume that Ireland, with the success of your films and the attention they've gotten, that you're attracting more people to Ireland and more attention to it as both a country and a culture.
Makes me also feel really old when someone tells me they were inspired as a child by Secret of Kells. You're like, oh geez. But it's lovely too. And the other thing is that I think is that like we're kind of telling stories back to ourselves and to the world rather than having our stories told to us. There's always been a slightly awkward feeling in Ireland whenever other countries would make a movie set in Ireland. There was always a slight, I think it's a post-colonial fear of being embarrassed by yourself. So kind of giving that voice for young kids and stuff to see something of their own culture reflected back to them. And I think that's really important too. But yeah, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to the Japanese animation scene for some of the young talent we have too, because that generation that I was speaking to earlier, they grew up on that. And I think that's hugely what they inspired them to keep going with hand-drawn animation. I think if Japanese animation hadn't been so popular in the 90s and early 2000s, there would have only really been, Pixar and stuff to inspire kids. So, as much as I love Pixar, it's cool that there's still kids that want to make hand-drawn animation. And they're a big part of the resurgence,
It's much more accessible too, like if you see the latest Pixar movie and you want to do something like that, you're going to have to invest a lot of money in like really good CG software. Whereas if you see a hand-drawn film as a little kid, you can just draw those characters and you can keep on drawing them until you get better and better. You can practice, and it's very, very accessible. You can make a little flip book in your. I'll
tell you a little magical story. It's amazing with the magic of a flip book. My little granddaughter is 3 years old and she's in the house tonight. And a few years ago, Pete Docter gave me this box of flip books of the 9 Old Men that he'd worked on. And I opened them up and I flipped it for her. And she was like, Thumper, and then I showed her Tinkerbell. She recognized Tinkerbell. And then we made a video of her because she just was flipping it over and over again, amazed at the movement. And it's so tactile. And like, you know, she could imagine probably drawing it. You know, it's so right there in front of you. It's lovely. The basicness of it, the sophisticated use of the basics or whatever is amazing.
Something I remember James Baxter talking to me about when I was working on a story a few years ago. He said that, okay, if you working in CG, you can learn the program in 10 days or 2 weeks. But if you've been drawing, you know what you want to make the program do. That if you start learning animation by drawing, you can correct things very quickly, and you're not dependent on the rig you're given or the software you're given. It's all you and your thoughts. And wanted to point that out to you.
I think the same thing was told to us even in college, that like, okay, you want to animate, but you have to be able to draw first, and that's why life drawing was so important in our college. You know, and they taught visual language. And at the time, I think in the start we were kind of going, well, what's the point of this? You know, we just want to be able to animate, but like it informs so much. And I think, you know, I think we realized then, I think by the end of the first year, how important life drawing was in getting gesture in. And yeah, like even now, well, not now with lockdown, but up until recently, like Cartoon Saloon would have invested in life drawing classes and encouraged people to go. And it's still so important. You have to know the basics in order to be able to, you know, like improve on that.
Yeah, well,
all that said, sorry, Charles.
Interrupting, Chuck Jones always said that if someone came to him with a portfolio of cartoon characters, he wouldn't be interested in them. But if they came with a portfolio of really good life drawings, that would be the artist he'd want to hire.
I remember our life drawing teacher, Laura, showing me Chuck Jones's life drawing that he'd left copies of when he visited the college before our time, and they really knocked my socks off, and it really showed me. And Richard Williams as well, it was a great proponent of life drawing. Glenn Keane, when he came to visit us, he showed us his life drawings, and it's always, to me, it's the backbone of everything. And also it's quite meditative. It's quite like, it brings you back like that, and I guess just observational drawing bring you back to your original inspirations. And I mean, I wouldn't have gotten into animation if I didn't just love drawing like Batman or whatever as a kid, but I think discovering life drawing and visual language and observational drawing is what makes you stay connected to the art side. But I do want to make the point about computers. Like, we're not Luddites. I mean, computers have been a huge part of us being able to make these movies. Like, we never painted a cell in Cartoon Saloon, never once. Like, we started the studio in '99, and we used every scrap of money we could find to buy an Animo ink and paint system, you know. So right from the beginning, we've kind of tried to be hybrid. And even though a hand-drawn is the core of our work and the core of our style and the core of our studio, like, we wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for like our compositing team. And they have the eye of a painter. Like, they really can look at what we're doing and, you know, really enhance it and understand that we don't want to lose the hand-drawn feeling, but they can, you know, add effects like lighting and, you know, help with multi-plane camera effects. And so I really do think that there can be artists who maybe don't draw every day, but have the kind of mind that they can apply it through computers. And I mean, you just have to look at the artistry in something like Spider-Verse to see that there's amazing artists in the computer animated realm, or even, you know, something I saw Soul, and I mean, there's like there's Picasso in there, you know what I mean? There's real art in there. Just because it's made in a computer doesn't matter. But I just think for us, hand drawn is it's a way without a lot of money and a lot of render power to make something impressive, because it is just as basic as how well can you draw. That's enough, you know.
And allows people to express themselves too, very, very immediately and organically.
Yeah.
Well, I remember Nora warning me that you have to be careful how you sit in relation to Tomm and Ross, because they're going to be drawing you. And
I'm especially guilty of mean caricatures of people. I've had Nora's husband come to me and say, "You shouldn't have shown her that last one." I was like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, and you know, like when the hairs start to stand up in the back of your neck because you think that someone is staring at you. That happens in meetings sometimes, and then you look over at Tomm and he's just like drawing. In my defense, as the company has grown, most of my drawing time started to be in meetings. So
well, you also mentioned, Tomm, observational drawing, and I remember Doug Sweetland, a very talented, he was one of Pixar's top animators for years and did the the short Presto, said that when he was first dating one woman, she thought he and his friends were making fun of people, that they'd sit there in like a coffee shop or a bowling alley and say, look at the way that guy walks. Look at, his left foot is kind of dragging in that part of the step. And he said, no, animators are magpies, we're pack rats.
Yeah.
That we're always watching people and always gathering gestures and expressions and so forth. And something else to ask you about while we're talking about drawing.
There's a little moment in I think it's the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, but I can't be sure. There's so many documentaries now about Miyazaki and Ghibli, but he's really having a go at an animator who tried to animate a snake-like movement, and he was saying, "You've never looked at a snake, have you? I can tell you've never seen a snake." And he really says, "Go and look at a snake and stop giving me this kind of copy of a copy of a copy," So I think that speaks to it,
Yeah, and I think the same can be said for the backgrounds too. I mean, we had I tell this story a few times, all right, but we had people come from the cities maybe to work on backgrounds, and they'd have to draw a wild forest, and it was very clear sometimes that their idea of a forest, their preconception of a forest is a parkland, like with manicured paths leading through, and like trimmed hedges and trimmed trees. And you'd have to go, no, okay, right, we need to do like a little field trip and get out into a forest and get off the path and like get down in the middle of the brambles and look around. It's just like chaotic and a mess. You have to get this idea of like a park, a manicured park out. And so, yeah, people do come with preconceptions, like that snake thing. They think, oh yeah, I know how a snake will move. And the same thing with Merlin. People go, oh yeah, I know how a bird moves. And then, they'll do an animation. You're like, yeah, but that's not how a little bird of prey will move. Like, you need faster wing flaps. You need like, the claws out in front, so people do come with preconceptions. We're guilty of it as well, Tom himself. I think everyone is. And sometimes you have to go, no, I just actually need to look at it, and I need to draw it. I need to study it. And
something
Ross
came up.
Sorry, go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say something that came up that many of the artists talked to me about was the need for the backgrounds to be an Irish forest. That one animator from Brazil said, I'm used to drawing the forests I grew up seeing were tropical. And another the artist said, I grew up in France. And Ross, you had told her that, no, that's a French forest, that the colors are wrong and the plants are wrong. And can you talk a little bit about that and the need for that specificity?
It was a little bit depressing actually, because they would draw this beautiful forest that had sunlight pouring in through the trees, and like, a place that you would want to lie down and sunbathe and relax for an hour. And you just go, no, that's not what an Irish forest is like. If you did that in an Irish forest, you would be wet immediately, and you'd be covered in brambles and spikes and little things would be crawling over you and stuff. So I think, yeah, it's again the preconception, and we had to say, no, the color and the light in Irish forest is very, very blue and very cold, and you have to kind of get rid of a lot of that, that like super hot light coming through the trees and stuff. And imagine that, yeah, your feet are wet, and yeah, it's a bit more miserable.
I was going to share, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Ross. So Ross has an amazing career just as a painter, and he's abstracted the Irish landscape by observing the light and the color so well that I think it must be intimidating for the background artists to work with him, because he really knows what he's talking about when he talks about the Irish landscape. But like where I would have said that my plan B career might have been a tattoo artist or something, I think Ross has told me more than once he'd love to be like a park ranger or like work in forestry or something. So people like Pauline, who had a real eye for the different plants and all, were always really appreciated, right? The people that didn't just draw a cartoon leaf, but they drew a specific oak leaf or whatever.
Yeah, like even at the start when we were doing like layouts, Pauline is a layout artist, but she's one of those multi-talented people that she can then go immediately into layout line and go into even clean up animation and everything. But without asking her to, she did this really detailed sheet of all the different native plants that you might find in a forest and how to like cartoonify them and stuff, like just off her own initiative. And that was like, wow, that's amazing. Okay, we're going to photocopy this and pass it around to everyone working in the background department. So again, it's that information and it's that studying real life in order to inform.
Sorry, Ross, are you certain that Pauline isn't a wolf walker? Because when you think about all the
makes more sense now.
She's like, so like she led the crew on like midnight rambles along the river, and she would sleep
with no light,
outdoors.
with no
Yeah,
torches. Yeah,
to make
torches
her
were not
eyes
light.
adjust, and she would like sleep outside. She's a total like survivalist, and she also made us all amazing like embroidered hoodies with like Wolf Walker's characters embroidered on and stuff. And I think
The kind of
actually,
the running joke that if there is some kind of zombie apocalypse, we'll all be
yeah,
dead, but Pauline will be
Pauline,
totally fine.
I would be in Pauline's tribe. I would just do what I was told, whatever she
Yeah,
did.
but she might eat you if the stocks run low. You know?
That's true.
What you were saying about the leaves, though, reminds me of what Mark Davis said about Tyrus Wong's work on Bambi, that he said an oak leaf isn't just an oak leaf, and that when Tyrus painted it, you saw something in it and you understood something about it that made you handle things differently. And
Yeah.
that's what it seems you're saying about Pauline and some of your other artists, that by,
Yeah.
once again, making them understand the specifics and what sets this tree apart, it can take on a larger role in the painting and in the film.
Yeah, there's an almost spiritual kind of thing running through a lot of people that are attracted to our studio, in the appreciation of nature and our sense that nature is something to be kind of respected rather than kind of protected like a tidy little garden or a park or something. I think there's a general communication, and I see people picking up from it, and I hope that it does filter out. And I felt it in all the projects. There's a kind of almost feral sense of wanting to communicate the power, and you know, not to get too woo woo and stuff about it. I could feel it. I could feel it through the team. I don't know about you, Ross. There wasn't too many there was a lot of real nature eco warrior types drawn to the project, right?
Yeah. And I think they brought that enthusiasm as well. Like that's worth, like it's worth so much to have someone that is really engaged in the project, and like, you know, will come in maybe a little bit early and just immediately start drawing, you know, and they're not just looking at their watch going like, oh, how soon can I get out of here? That enthusiasm.
It's always a warning sign when someone's like, just tell me exactly what you want so I can get this over and done with, which I can imagine people who are worn down from project after project and they just feel, give me the exact, you know, specifications so I can be efficient. But we were so lucky that so many people were really passionate about the subject matter. Yeah.
Well, I remember talking to both of you. It might have been at the pub, where a lot of the good conversations took place, but you were talking about how this goes back to the roots of, I think, all your films, and that native culture, that the Irish word for wolf, which I may mispronounce, you said was Mactira, that meant son of the land or son of the forest, and that you were dealing with a culture that had a different attitude towards nature and the creatures that lived in it in this film.
Yeah, the more research we did into that, the more like it became quite amazing and quite, you know, well, I don't know, it really opened my eyes as well. We would have maybe had a romantic view of like the, you know, the pre-Christian people of Ireland, and I suppose I was waiting for the research to actually, you know, disprove some of our notions, but in reality they had a much more balanced view of humans in the ecosystem, humans in nature. Sure, they hunted and like they took what they needed from nature, but maybe similar to the way that the Aboriginal people in Australia and Native Americans in North America, that they knew how much to take. They didn't take advantage of their place. They had respect for other megafauna, other predators, you know, and when we were researching their attitude towards the wolves, sometimes they might leave offerings out to them in the hope that, like, you know, then the wolves would, you know, leave them alone, that there would be this mutual kind of respect. And they thought there was power in these creatures too. So the whole notion that Cromwell brought over, and actually I just discovered that it was the Elizabethans that had this notion that the wolves should be wiped out. That was so totally alien to the mentality that was in Ireland before that you should just get rid of a creature from the ecosystem. It's so wrong, you know, even to this day. But yeah, so I think that's why one of the reasons why we focused on Cromwell as being the basis for Lord Protector is that he had this idea that you could make a species extinct, and it was like what was needed to tame the land. It was just so bizarre and so wrong.
What I thought was lovely, I was reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass over the summer, which is by a biologist who's also a Native American lady called Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she speaks to that, the idea of the honorable harvest and the idea of not taking more than nature could kind of replenish and stuff. And I just think that there's wisdom in that old way. I mean, you don't have to be vegan or vegetarian to understand that we're overfishing, and you know, the factory farming is polluting the world and everything, and just that idea of not taking more than we need and having respect for our fellow travelers, not hunting megafauna to extinction, and that they have a valid right to be here just as much as us. I think we need to return to some of that wisdom, and I think that wisdom is in the old stories and the old beliefs. We don't have to take it wholesale. Obviously there's stuff that I'm glad has died out, you know, superstitions and dangerous ideas, but I think there's some wisdom there that we could borrow from that would be helpful.
Well, there's something I think we might have talked about, Tom, when we were talking about the Northwest Coast Indian art.
Yes.
There were tribes who could take pieces out of a tree that
yes,
they did and do
the
it so
Haida.
skillfully, the tree would grow back.
I know, and if only for COVID, I really wanted to go and spend time with them this year, because I went to the Vancouver Museum of the First Nations, and I was so fascinated to hear how they lived so lightly on the land, you know, pre-colonization. But what Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks to, which I think is really at the heart of Wolfwalkers too, is becoming indigenous to place. You know, like Robin and Bill are colonizers, you know, they've come from England with a certain mindset, and yet they learn to be indigenous to place, you know, they learn to live in balance, you know. And I think we all can learn that. And I think we don't have to sort of feel like, oh, because we're not indigenous to where we're from, that we can't, you know, be connected to the land that we live in and the nature that we're part of. I think we can all learn, because the lovely thing Robin Wall Kimmerer says in Braiding Sweetgrass is that at one time her nation, her tribe, were newcomers, and they learned from the people that were there before, and the people that were there before happened to be, you know, trees and wolves and bears and things, and they looked at them about how to live in balance, you know. And so I think that's kind of the heart of the story in Wolfwalkers, that you can be from another tribe or whatever, but through seeing the world from the point of view of the people that are there already, you can live in balance with them rather than having to hunt them to extinction, you know.
You're reminding me of some of the work of Frederick Bach and his ecologically themed films, and I wonder
oh yeah, The Man Who Planted Trees. Oh my god, yeah, that's such a beautiful film.
Is he also and well, Frederick's films still make me cry every time I see them, not just
Man Who Planted Trees is deep in there. Yeah, a lot of those films I discovered on Channel 4 when I was younger, like Sisyphus and The Man Who Planted Trees. There was great, we were really lucky in the 90s that, I mean, I talk about this in regards to Tara Sorensen and Apple. She reminds me of those commissioning editors like Claire Kitson and Teresa Plummer Andrews, who had this kind of, you know, they had a sense that they were commissioning films for a national broadcaster, so they wanted to offer something, you know, great, not just to sell advertising space. So on Channel 4 we had a lot of independent animation being shown, you know, usually late at night as part of formations, or on the BBC, and I mean obviously RT, maybe not for such idealistic reasons, showed a lot of like Czechoslovakian and Hungarian animation and stuff. And I do think there's a wealth of stuff there that's worth rediscovering. Maybe that's one of the good things, yeah.
That also goes back to the whole thing of government funding as well, that usually with government funding, there will be certain criteria that it must have some cultural reference, or it must have some benefit to the nation, or it must have some kind of educational value or something like that. Whereas if you have a system based on just capitalism, then it's going to be what film makes the most money. And that could be just something that sells a lot of toys, you know, and that's the film that gets made. So it really comes back to, you know, I do think it comes back to more government funding of the arts.
Or an appreciation that allows even like a commercial broadcaster like Channel 4 to realize that there's a value in showcasing stuff outside of the most, you know, the most commercial thing that they can show. So show the, you know, the commercial stuff, of course, and it's all fun and good stuff, but just make sure there's, and that's what I like about what Apple are doing. They seem to be building a really nice curated platform rather than just like a huge library of stuff that you could get lost in.
Well, and remember, Channel 4 introduced us to an artist named Nick Park
Yeah,
with Creature Comforts.
yeah. And the other thing I was going to say earlier, we talked about the National Film Board of Canada, and I hope we're not getting too esoteric for our audience, but Joanna Quinn is an amazing animator that I just love, and she's just made a film that's a co-production between her company in Wales and the National Film Board of Canada. And I just saw the trailer for it the other day, and talk about drawing, like it's really
amazing.
drawing,
It's
it's
so
life
amazing.
drawing, it's amazing. So yeah, anyway.
And it's quite adult as well. I can't imagine that being shown before the watershed.
Well, and remember, the National Film Board also brought us some things like Walking. That was
Oh yeah,
amazing
gosh.
drawing.
All of that stuff. I think we saw the National Film Board of Canada stuff in the 90s on Formations. Yeah, on Channel 4, they would show just crazy animation. Maybe it was cheap, maybe it was filler, but for me, it was like some kind of national service, because otherwise I would have thought that animation began and ended with, like, you know, He-Man and Batman the Animated Series, as much as I loved Batman, you know.
Also, that you could produce techniques that follow techniques that are just masochistically difficult, like pin screen.
Yes, yes. Or who was it made that amazing Old Man and the Sea, and it was all painted on glass?
Alexander Petrov.
Petrov.
Yeah, that's
Mind-blowing stuff.
painting
And
over.
that's animation as art, you know, and I think that's what I'm most excited about as a medium. As much as I love cartoons, and I just love cartoons, like I enjoyed the heck out of so many, you know, cartoony cartoons like Trolls, or I enjoyed watching Frozen with my granddaughter. You know, they're good, they're entertaining, and they're often a lot of love and craft put into them. And so I totally appreciate that. But I also love that there's people out there really pushing the limit in terms of kind of how much of a fine art animation can be, you know.
Yeah, like the expressiveness that we got into Wolfwalkers is only barely skimming the surface of like the expressiveness that exists in short films and films like you were just mentioning there. You know, like the fact that we were encouraging artists to go rough with the line to maybe express emotions of the characters, that's nothing in comparison to what has been done in some of those films.
And I always go back to Marcel Yankovic and the Hungarian folk tales. I think if people can seek those out, they'll see that, you know, using folk art as a starting point, they were able to really communicate something of the way that culture saw the world, not just in the stories, but in how they drew them, you know. So
Some of the artists you've been referring to remind me of another point. In the United States, we're now very concerned about animation becoming more inclusive, because for so many years it was an old boys network.
white boys and everything, yeah.
There were very few women animators or women in positions of creativity. There were some exceptions. Disney in the 30s, you had artists like Sylvia Holland and Bianca Majoli, and of course, a little later on, Mary Blair and Retta Scott, but that was a small number. Yet it seemed to me, the time I've spent in Cartoon Saloon, that is a much more balanced in terms of gender, and that it's a place where there is certainly no restrictions on the women artists or any resentment that they're occupying an equal or a superior position. There were so many very, very
Yeah,
women.
I will say it wasn't always like that. I'm really hopeful the way it's gone. I remember Nora describing the studio as being a bit like a submarine at one point, because it was all guys except for her. But
I think that was at the very start, though, when there was only maybe about like 12 or 15 people or something
exactly,
like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And what I've seen
Whereas
is that
I think the balance
Nora
now,
has
you
encouraged,
were telling,
yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
Tom, you were telling me the proportions the other day, and it's over 50%
female now. Yeah, it's 60% female, which is amazing. And then a small percentage of people who don't identify as either gender, and then the rest male, which is amazing. Like, just amazing to me. And then we, like, not the same people, not the same percentage, but still 60% non-Irish. So we have influence from all over the world, which is really cool. Like, as you say, Brazilian people, Filipino people, really interesting. But I think that it's something that you need to keep an eye on and always make sure, like, it speaks a little bit to the shy thing earlier. You just have to make sure that you're kind of keeping an eye on it. But definitely, I'm happy to say that, like, Nora's directing a film now where all the supervisors are at least a 50-50 split between the supervisors, male and female. And then after that, Louise Bagnall is preparing a feature, and similarly, she's built a really great team that's a really well-balanced team. So happy to see that. You know, there's areas we could work on too. I do think when we did the kind of diversity analysis there just before the lockdown, I was conscious that we're a very young studio. I don't understand what's wrong with the industry or the studio or the business in general that we don't have that many people staying. Maybe it'll change as time goes on, but the industry seems very young. We kind of wonder about why it's like what's and young women too. We kind of wonder, is it a case that like Nora and Jilly both are, Jilly's a director in Lighthouse, they both have husbands who are stay-at-home dads, and does that become a choice for women, and what can we do about that, that they don't feel that they can fairly balance motherhood and directing? I don't know, there's a lot of work still to do, but it looks good. It looks like there's, I said in another panel, it's like there's shoots coming and we just need to keep watering them and keep an eye on it.
Well, I think you need to keep in mind, Tom, that there's been an enormous boom in animation over the last several years, that there's just much more animation production now than there ever has been, and there are more schools teaching it. So you're going to benefit from these young artists who are coming, out of these programs. Whereas again, 20 years ago, there were maybe a handful of really top-notch schools to go to study animation. Now there are many more, and there are even online places where during COVID, or if you live in a remote area, you can at least begin your training. So I think you and Ross are benefiting from this new generation of artists who are growing up wanting to be animators. Remember, the Nine Old Men didn't. Neither did Chuck Jones. They wanted to be painters.
Yes,
and
they were more like Ross than me.
But they could find work in animation during the Depression. So yeah, Walt Disney is looking for artists. I can get a job. I can eat.
Yeah.
Today, the people want to be animators. They've grown up watching it, and with VCRs and DVDs and the internet, they're exposed to films in a way that I wasn't. I don't think Tom, you and Ross were.
No.
Growing up.
Like I was in kind of, friendly competition with Ross and one or two other people in the town that were artists, but now they can look at the art of their contemporaries, and if they're not completely overwhelmed and intimidated, they can improve by, following people on YouTube or Tumblr or whoever they see it. And also the technology. I mean, Ross and I joined Young Irish Filmmakers in Kilkenny mainly to get our hands on the equipment that was so hard and expensive to find, where now people can make animation very easily with their iPad or something, so I do think that that's why they're improving. And that's why I'd say I'm so not a Luddite. I mean, we had line testers, right? And I hear about the 9-1 Men and people like that had to do, overnight development to check their animation. And I really do think that my animation went skyrocketed in ability and everything by doing line testing and being shown how to test my keys and then make my charts and then try out different in-betweens and all of that kind of time-saving stuff that you don't figure out intuitively. And now with TV Paint and stuff, hand-drawn animators can have a playback button the whole time, and certainly CG animators too. So you just have more opportunities to see your work and test it and try again. And that iterative process is what makes you better. And that's how I comfort myself that the young artists are so talented. But they have some advantage I didn't have,
Same thing I noticed over in Leica, when they were doing the stop motion animation, that they could see an instant playback. And I remember one of the old stop motion animators there, who I think was in the Will Vinton studio at the very start, or maybe before that. They had to send off the stuff to be developed and then wait for it to be developed and then see it and then suddenly realize, oh man, that didn't work. I have to do the whole thing all over again. But it might be like a week later, whereas they can see an instant playback and see, oh, that needs to be changed, and they can just go back a few frames, delete, and then start from that.
Yeah,
it's really, so they just use the technology in the same way.
Our animation supervisor, Sven, was the one who introduced me to TV Paint. He was an intern after Secret of Kells, and I was planning Song of the Sea on paper, and he was using TV Paint, and he had never animated on paper, but he's an amazing hand-drawn animator. And I did the posing on paper and gave it to him, and then he animated it in TV Paint by scanning it in, and I honestly couldn't see the difference. And when he showed me I think it loosens you up, you know, like you're not afraid to try something crazy because there's so little to risk. So you might try and Sven is the king of the clever tricks like animating on trees, and you might notice it, or any of those little things that a small studio needs. Like I remember Sven figuring out a way to animate the whole crowds. That's such a TV Paint way to animate crowds, you know, like you take the whole drawing and just cut it out and move it and get the basic movement and then go back and put in the legs and the arms and stuff like that. On paper, you would never do that because you wouldn't know it was going to work, but it's such low risk to experiment and try stuff out with the software. So, you know, I think it's only a good thing that the young people have access to all that stuff.
Well, at the risk of sounding ancient, when I was in film school, yeah, you had to shoot your tests on film on an Oxberry and then wait 2-3 days for it to come back. Whereas the process you're describing, your initial inspiration and your ideas are still there because you can look at it right away,
Yeah.
almost as if you're flipping it.
Yeah. So like in college, I would animate all night and then have to go into college the next day to test it on a line tester because I didn't have a line tester at home. And so I was only ever going to be as risky as I could risk to make sure it was going to at least work and pass the exam. Whereas now, if you're animating on TV Paint as a student, you might try it 3 different ways before you submit it. There's no doubt that that's making better animators.
It also probably, you know, might have ruined your back, Tom, carrying around reams of paper, you know, from studio back to home.
I remember I had my entire final year film in one folder, and I went into the bathroom. I was so tired, and I walked out, and I was about to get on the bus, and I went, my film! And I had to run all the way back to the college and run into the bathroom, and thank God it was there. So like, I'm glad of being able to back things up and stuff these days.
Well, that happened to Ollie Johnston. He animated his last scene in The Rescuers and handed it off to his assistant, who put it on top of her car and drove off. And she had to drive back, and we're finding drawings that had been run over and were in the rain.
Oh man.
Ollie was such a gentle soul. He didn't fuss, but it was a while before he went back and redid the scene.
Yeah.
But
That's
I'll also
heartbreaking.
say I was a bit upset walking around Cartoon Saloon and still finding boxes of these beautiful drawings from Kells and even Song of the Sea that are stacked up by the staircase and so forth, and that these the drawings are
little cavalier about the drawings.
Well, but in the same vein though, that there's still, especially on Wolfwalkers, there's still so much actual art being done on paper and card. I mean, like all of the backgrounds were hand drawn and hand inked, and all of the color backgrounds were hand painted and then scanned in. And so, you know, there's still a lot of very tactile.
The Wolf Vision scenes are insane. Like they're all on paper, so they were planned out in CG, and then the final image is drawn on paper, frame by frame, and every little leaf and every little mushroom on the tree or every brick in a house was all drawn on paper. So yeah, we're still a bit crazy that way, but I think it's worth it. I think it creates something
nice.
a little bit timeless. Yeah. And I just like the physicality. I love animation paper. When I do life drawing, I actually draw on animation paper. I actually just like the texture of it.
The next time I'm at Cartoon Saloon, if you see me looking through those drawings, it's just idle curiosity. I completely lost my. Oh, can you talk a bit about the Wolf Vision sequence, because that's. I remember talking to Evan about it, and you both emphasized that you wanted something that would stand out visually from the rest of the film, that this had to be, you had to show how exciting this would be for Robin to discover these new senses, and how do you illustrate that? And the results, I'm noticing people sending comments saying, yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was like, it did have to, we knew from the very, very start that it had to be like the roller coaster ride, you know, the part of the film that people would sit up and go, oh wow, what's this? This is weird, but it's great. And it had to be so kind of visually astounding too, and so kind of free and liberating, that Robin herself in the story, when she comes back, when she wakes up, that it would be so amazing that she could never just go back to her normal life and deny that life, you know. It would be like, I suppose, like kind of like the Matrix thing, that if you took that pill and you saw what life was really like, that you wouldn't just go back to living like a, you know, like a drone. And then we also had the problem that we had two styles already in the film, you know, the town style and the forest style. And so Wolf Vision then would be this third style. And we were aware that you can't do just too many styles, because then you've kind of broken the universe. So it kind of had to fit into the forest style in a weird way. It had to be this immersive CG fly through roller coaster ride, but also had to sit in with these quite still, you know, almost 2D flat perspective type views of the forest. So Tom himself knew kind of what it should look like, but we couldn't really put anything down on paper. We did a lot of concepts and stuff, and we got a manual, that animator we were talking about, to do a test scene in the conceptual trailer, which is still amazing to see. But the way that he animated it, we just knew that you couldn't put that into a pipeline. You couldn't ask a team of animators to just animate like that, because it was basically one take and you could never get retakes on it. And if something, you know, took an animator like a whole month to do and it didn't work, you just had to live with it. So we had to figure out some kind of pipeline method. So we worked with Evan McNamara, who has a studio up in Dublin, Paper Panther Studio, and he's a director and animator himself, and he works with a lot of traditional media, like he does kind of paper cutout and stop motion and sand and glass and paint and glass, all kinds of stuff. So we knew that he would have the chops to be able to pull something like that off. And he did a lot of testing. He had never done VR sculpting before, and he just popped on the VR headset and just started like drawing the forest art environment. He, like you were saying, he just learned the software, but he knew what he wanted to do with the software. And he had built this amazing forest and did a camera fly through till he got what Tom and myself were looking for. And then he printed all of those frames off and just started hand rendering it. And it took him a good few weeks to get all of it done. And in the end, like, he showed us a couple of seconds, but it was just amazing. And Tom himself sat up in the seat. We're like, yeah, that's it. It has to be like that, which didn't really impress our production assistants or our producers, because they're like, what? This is the most time-consuming animation the Cartoon Saloon could ever do, and this is what you want 3.5 minutes of the film to be like. So yeah, we had
it
to.
worked out in the end. All well,
It did,
well,
yeah.
it ends well. But like, I love it, because that's the kind of wild card chaos that I'm glad like we did before COVID, because that's the kind of experimentation and stuff. Like, we talked a lot about experimental art films and stuff earlier. I love that there's a little touch of that still in it. And I just noticed in the chat some people speaking about the sound, and that's also really important, because, you know, as much as, you know, wolves have this, and you know, we can't do smell-o-vision or whatever, but we represented the sense with color, and the rest of the scene is kind of desaturated, but the sounds are so important. And sound designer Sebastian was really amazing about finding a way to kind of layer in the human voice and the wolf sounds, and just make it feel like we were in Robin's head. So not only did we have this kind of steady cam vibe of Robin looking around, but we had her breath and everything. So I mean, it's pretty immersive, and yeah, I'm happy about it. I think I'm going to go and see it in the cinema again, just before it gets the cinemas get closed again to another lockdown, because I want to see it on a big screen one more time.
Well, as you mentioned, Tom, you're doing something very challenging for animation. You're illustrating and animating something that isn't visual. You know, the background on this, in case people haven't read the book, is that like, my cat's sense of smell is about 10 times more sensitive than mine or humans, and a wolf's is at least 4 times more sensitive than that they can do. You know, we live in a world that's very visual. If something looks like A to us and smells like B, we assume it's A. To many animals, it's B, because the smell is the more important sense. And the hearing is so much more sensitive than ours, particularly since ours has been dulled by the noisy world we live in. So you're taking senses that are important to an animal, and you're showing the audience visually how these non-visual senses could be experienced. I was very, very struck with that sequence myself.
Yeah, it was kind of hard, because the more research we did into how a canine or a lupine would see the world, it became important, as you say, that like visuals are not important. Like, they have very limited color palette and everything. So yeah, it was that catch-22 of like, we have to represent in visual format and the whole non-visual interpretation of the world. but I think that's why we wanted to get this pulsing life energy through the environment, almost as if like that it's like a non-visual but a sensation of the environment passing through. And we always like this idea of almost like a heartbeat going through the trees and through the ground, and you know, you can get that automatically with the hand rendered kind of like a boiling line. And so I think Evan kind of pulled it off in the fact that you do get the sense that the whole environment around is live, is lively and alive, you know.
That's what a
Has
line
this
test
energy.
always. Line tests have,
Yeah.
like even kind of crappy animation in line test has a life to it. It's crazy, and once it gets cleaned up, you realize, oh, that was the seduction of a line test. You know, I was getting a little bit of extra value. So I do think that kind of pencil test effect, and the fact that it's all drawn on paper, it gives a life to it. You know.
Well,
It's,
I was going to say that's something that Hosoda has talked about, and how the tale of Princess Kaguya was so striking, that keeping the line rough and loose, and basically the animator's rough, gives it a vibrancy on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the story I always tell about Kaguya was I was doing interviews back to back with Takahata at the Toronto Film Festival in 14 or 15, whenever Song of the Sea and Kaguya were released. And a lot of the stuff I was saying in interviews was how hand-drawn animation had its own language and its own style. And then I went to the cinema during the festival to see Tale of Princess Kaguya, and it was like a kick in the pants, because I went, oh, okay, everything I've been saying, this is doing way more than Song of the Sea did. So it was really like a call to action, or a laying down the gauntlet. We said I was really inspired by that. And Ross and I both, especially the sequence where she leaves the palace and rips off all the stuff, we said, let's at least get some of that spirit, at least in some sequences, like running with the wolves and stuff.
I think it also gave us the bravery to have that boiling line on, like, you know, in a feature film on a big screen, because I don't know where it came from. It might have come from college days, that we were always a little bit unsure of, like, oh, you can't have a boiling line. It'll just, you know, it'll wreck people's heads in a feature film, and on a big screen, every single little pixel difference will show up, like, you know, massively. And I think, yeah, with Kaguya, the fact that I pulled it off and it actually added to it, it didn't take away from the experience. We were like, yeah, we can do this.
I think it was nice that we had such a talented like final line team. I know they're usually called cleanup, but I always call them final line, because they were animators, like they weren't technicians. They had to really think about what was going on for the character, like especially with Robin, who transitioned from one style to another over the course of the movie, and they were able to kind of balance it so that it wasn't wildly choppy from one artist to the next. It wasn't like a James Baxter line test and a Glenn Keane line test and a John Pomeroy line test that would just look wildly different. They kind of found a way to like draw the characters in a kind of expressive way that wasn't super jarring. And I think, you know, we owe a lot to them, and I think a lot of people have noted that they could see the line style as something that they appreciated about the movie, and that department usually are pretty invisible, and it's kind of a thankless job and seen as a job on the way to being an animator. But I think our supervisor John and the team just did such a great job and showed that it's as important a part of animation as inking is to comic books, for example.
Well, I have a cell. This brings up another. I wanted to talk to you about some influences, but if you look at Richard Williams' A Christmas Carol,
Yeah.
Christmas Present has it feels almost like a grease pencil line.
Yeah.
That particularly the sequences that Abe Levitow animated.
Yeah.
And I know you've already talked about Marcel Yankovic and Takahata, but when I was again researching the book, you did talk a good deal about Richard Williams and that how he was an influence
Hugely,
on both of
yeah.
your approach.
The thing about Dick Williams was, I remember having again a Channel 4. Oh no, maybe it was BBC that time. It was a South Bank show. There was a documentary about him, and I saw it on VHS tape when I was in college, and it just knocked my socks off, because he was saying that, you know, animation hasn't done Rembrandt yet, but it could, and you know, it's an art for anything you can draw, you can animate. And no offense to my teachers and stuff, but it did seem that there was animatable style and non-animatable style based on whether it was kind of, you know, production line ready. And the idea that Dick Williams was booking against that and saying, if you can draw it, you can animate it. And, you know, that was very inspiring. And the fact that he kind of feared no art, and he tried, as you said, very life drawing, sketchy stuff in A Christmas Carol, super flat and perspectiveless stuff in Thief and the Cobbler, and then he did like the Pink Panther title sequence. Yeah, I mean, that was really inspiring to us, and the way he took from the best of the the kind of Hollywood legend animators, you know, like he had so much respect for Milt Kahl and Ken Harris and all those guys, but he applied it to something quite artistic, which I thought was lovely.
Something, if I'm going to jump in before you look like you're about to start, Ross, was, of course, one of Richard's mentors was Art Babbitt. And years ago, I was on a panel with him, and somebody said, what's the greatest piece of animation ever done? And I thought, okay, Art, he worships Bill Tightly, he's going to say, you know, something of his. And Art thrust out his jaw and said, it hasn't been done yet. Everything we've done in this art form has yet to scratch the surface of what it's capable of doing.
I remember hearing that in college. I can't remember who it was, but somebody wrote it on the board in college that our art form is in its infancy, you know. In those kind of idealistic early days of my career, I kind of took that as a challenge, you know.
I'm curious though, what are there other artists, and Ross, you should chime in on this one too, the other animators or animation directors whom you do see as influences or whose work has inspired you?
Well, I think maybe we might be a little bit, I don't know, we get influenced by so many non-animation artists. That was one of the things in Wolfwalkers, when like we've been asked about our inspirations for Wolfwalkers quite a lot in the last couple of months, and looking back through all of the folders and all of the you know, all of the artwork that inspired us and everything, there's a lot of painters, there's a lot of illustrators, there's a lot of like graphic novels in there. There's like a huge influence for our forest style was Emily Hughes, who's done you know, beautiful kids books, and the one book that she did called Wild was a massive influence for our forest style. So I think the future of animation in a way is to be inspired by everything in the visual art form. As Tom was saying, that like, you know, we're only at the start, the infancy of this art form, and you know, if anything can be painted or drawn or even sculpted, then it can be animated. So I think maybe for Cartoon Saloon, because we're such a traditional, maybe handmade, hand-drawn studio, that we take influence and inspiration from everything that is like illustrated or painted or drawn in comics or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I could give a list of the influences, but they might not be animated related. I think probably 101 Dalmatians and the early, like, you know, the kind of golden era of the Disney films, they were a huge influence in a way, because they were so brave in their backgrounds, and the way that the line work and color work seemed to be almost kind of impressionistic. But then that fed into like the impressionistic painting and that. So we were influenced by that as much, if not more. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, Tom.
I agree. No, I agree. And I think that's important that you, like those guys, as you said, were not looking at other animators. You know, if you look at Bambi, that was not made by people who were hero worshipping, you know, animation gods, because there were none yet. They were creating it. And I think we have to keep that kind of childlike, you know, beginner's mind, as they say in meditation. We have to kind of keep that meditation sort of idea in our heads and go, okay, if we were just starting now, what would we do? And not be too tied to inspirations from the past. As inspiring as, you know, Miyazaki and all these amazing people are, it's only inspiring because they're showing us that you can take from the world around you and bring that to your art form. You know, the worst thing to be would be to end up a kind of a copy or a kind of a faded photocopy of a copy of something that we loved, and it's better to just keep the kind of inspirational juices flowing by looking outside of the medium as well as at it, you know.
Well, that's something that Brad Bird, among others, have talked about, that who was friends with Milt after he retired. He'll call and said that, You know, if you asked Milk to animate something, he wouldn't look at anyone else's animation. He'd go out and look at a tiger. He'd look at the way people walked. And I think we're starting to get away from that now, but for a long time, at least in American animation, there was a tendency to think, a walk. Well, Milt did a really good one in this, or Mark did a great one in that. And look at that. Mark Davis used to say, I go out and paint a tree once a year just to remind myself of what's real.
Mm. I do the
I
same
think-
thing in my painting, actually, that I try every year to do a portrait. I don't enjoy doing portraits, but I find it really, really good practice to look and really study colors. And then I can bring that, it's kind of like a refresher thing. And I think in every art form, probably artists do the exact same thing, that, it's like getting back to basics and really looking and really studying and
Yeah, that's what I'm planning
retraining
to do
yourself.
this year. I'm planning to take a sabbatical and just focus on life drawing for 6 months or a year, and just see where I'm at after that, because I am a bit afraid of becoming like, that's why it was great to have Federico and Maria and some young artists come in, because you don't want to just start becoming a copy of yourself even, or start kind of getting bored with your own style. So it's good to go back to the well a little bit, and for me that's life drawing.
Something we haven't talked about that's a little less aesthetic and high-minded is, can you talk a little bit about the challenges of remaining a small independent studio in an era of bigger and bigger entertainment conglomerates or IP houses, or however you care to style them, that, you're still a small studio in, it must feel like driving a smart car amid a bunch of SUVs sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we've been really lucky, because we were so rocky for so much of our the financially so up and down and so close to the wire for so much of our existence, that I think it was tenuous, and it was always close to either disbanding or trying. We just didn't know when we'd have to give up and get real jobs. And in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I feel like we've hit a kind of a steadier place where we've established to an extent that people come to us for what we do. And we were able to have partnerships with like Apple or Netflix and places like that. And they're not coming to us to sort of be subsumed into them, but just for us to bring something of what we do to it. And I think that's really valuable. And I think that has been worth staying independent so long, because we've been able to kind of go our own way and not get subsumed into something else. Nora and Paul and I, as company owners, have always said that if we wanted to be Pixar or Disney, we'd go and work for them, and I would have the height of respect. And there was many years where I was kind of half working on my portfolio to apply for a job there, but for us to try and be that, or for us to go that way, would be a mistake, because the point of being independent and kind of is to offer something different, both to our crew and to the audience.
Also to have the freedom to be able to completely change tack, and like Nora and Paul write the 5-year plan or the 10-year plan or whatever, and you also have the freedom to change that if you want.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were going down that big multinational, or if you were subsumed, then you'd have to, Cartoon Saloon would have to follow a tried and tested route.
Yeah.
Well, I also knew then that Cartoon Saloon has made 4 features and gotten 4 Oscar nominations. You've won numerous prizes, at the Annies, at Annecy, at the major festivals around the world. Are those helpful for, that when a smaller studio gets that kind of recognition, does that give you a validity when you go in to pitch something, or when someone like Apple or Netflix comes to you? Do you have again, are you seen as more established, or I don't want to say more serious, but just there's something more solid about you, that you're getting this recognition?
I remember Dick Williams talking about it as professional armor, and I do think so. I think if your peers have recognized what you're doing, I mean, I definitely would say it's 50-50 whether Song of the Sea would have existed if we hadn't gotten the Oscar nomination for Secret of Kells. It definitely was looking rocky after Secret of Kells in terms just financially of keeping the studio going. And so that changed our lives and changed the fortune and future of the studio to a huge extent. And the Oscar nomination came because we'd been through that track, that strange festival, you know, special mention in Zagreb, a crystal in Annecy, you know, and it went on like that. And we got to the Annies, and I remember, and you know, the Irish Film and Television Awards, and all these like steps along the way. And we always thought that's as far as we'll ever get. That's amazing. And then the Oscar nomination was just so huge, and it opened doors, introduced us to so many of our animation kind of heroes and people that we're still friends with till now, and definitely feel that it kind of put a stamp on us as a studio as high quality. And if nothing else, I think the Academy has done us, and any film they've nominated from left of field, they do you a huge service with the nomination that way. And it has been really massive for us, but we don't take anything for granted. You know, you were always waiting for the one that's going to break the streak, but it's been nice. It's been nice so far.
At the risk of sounding a little self-serving, you've also, of course, always gotten great reviews.
Absolutely, Charles.
And
And champions like yourself since early on have made a lot to us, meant a lot to us, because, you know, early on it was hard to attract an audience because you were coming from nowhere, and you know, it's a lot of money to fork out to buy a DVD or to go to the cinema. And so with good reviews and experts like yourself saying these guys are doing something interesting, I mean, it really meant a lot. And the fact that Secret of Kells was critically successful and award successful, if not financially successful, was what made it possible for us to go on and kind of build a more financially stable business. So yeah, it meant a huge amount. Yeah. I should have mentioned that originally, Charles. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I wasn't the only one writing the good reviews. You'd have to, you know, I think all the critics would have lined up to do them. So
yeah, we've been very lucky, and we've had great, you know, champions in that.
I don't think it's luck. I think you make good films and people want to, you know, want to write about them. That's what makes this exciting. Do you want to sit through, you know, I remember having to sit through things like the Care Bears movies.
Can't imagine. I can't imagine. Even just as an Academy member now, you know, you kind of have to watch everything, you know, to be fair. And yeah, if I was and they're usually pretty good because they've kind of qualified. If I was just a general critic, I think I might crack up.
But I hope none of the participants worked on the Care Bears movie.
I have one friend who did, and we were teasing him that he said, you know, was that or starve? He said, and you didn't starve?
Yeah, but Glenn Keane worked on like the Chipmunks movie. You know, there's some good stuff even in, and that's what Dick Williams used to say. He used to complain about the commercials, and he used to tell a story that someone said to him, "Oh, you're so clever. You're so much better than what you're working on. Why don't you just try and do a good job of it?" And he kind of took that as a call to action. So the stupidest product would have the most beautiful animation because he just treated it all as equally valid. So yeah, we should.
Oh yeah, the Shell commercial that looked like the Turner in motion, or the Jovan Musk Oil that was Frank Frazetta in motion.
And don't forget one of our great influences, Alphonse Mucha. A lot of that artwork was like advertising soap or cigarettes or something, you know, but they were beautiful. So let's not get too snobby and high-minded.
But that also comes back to a question you've touched on before, which was, as an independent studio, does that give you, talk about the freedom that gives you? If you're doing, many American, the CG features are maybe north of $150 million in their budget.
Yeah. Whereas I think that brings the pressure,
Yeah, like Hosoda or Shinkai or Masayuasa in Japan are dealing with, you know, what, a tenth of that. And does that allow you to, that you don't have to earn $1 billion to show a profit, give you that freedom?
Yeah, and the streaming services were a huge part of that. It started with Song of the Sea, and the fact that I think it was Amazon at the time that picked it up, and that deal was enough to kind of cover our costs, you know. It was all gravy after that. So yeah, if you can make a movie for like 10 million or around there, you can, if it's good, you can make your money back. But if you take a big risk with like 100 million, you know, that's a scarier prospect. I don't think I'd relish that the
Yeah,
pressure,
and
you know?
the pressure that, yeah, exactly, because then you probably have executives weighing in, kind of going, we want to make it, we need to make our money back on this.
Understandably, yeah, because it's a
Yeah.
big investment, you know. So yeah, it's a getting into. It feels like you'd be like, I don't know, Gaudi building the Sagrada Familia, or Michelangelo or something. You'd be under the
it's
patronage of a.
But you would be worrying though, as a director, that the executives might be making the wrong call, or that they might be, diluting the vision, which, you'll be thinking like, okay, you're looking at it from a mathematical point of view almost, or a logical point of view of what made money before is now immediately going to make
Yeah.
money again or something. And yeah, it must be
It's
really
scary.
hard.
It's a
Yeah.
scary business because it's an expensive business, and every project that's original is a roll of the dice. And I think that's why we see so many sequels and stuff like that, because you just need a few safer bets to pay for the originals, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they ain't necessarily fun to sit through.
Oh, Charles,
I'm
you have
wondering,
my sympathy.
does Paul come around to you sometimes and say, can you find a cheaper way to do this? Or,
Paul and Stefan, there was moments where we had to sort of compromise, where they thought there was an awful lot of characters. Like, why do we need so many kids in the gang or whatever like that? But we sort of said, we'll find a way.
Couple questions that have been sent to me from the office members. I'm sorry, audience members. Office? One of them asking that there apparently are in Wolfwalkers some Easter eggs, some callbacks to your earlier films.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about those a little?
When Maeve has Robin down on the ground and is wrestling with her, she's taking stuff out of her her pockets, and she picks up the eye of Crom that Brendan used in Secret of Kells to to magnify all the tiny details, and she throws it away like
closely in Song of the
nothing.
Sea. If you look closely in Song of the Sea, as the kids crawl through a tunnel somewhere in Dublin, the Eye of Crom is buried there. So I don't know, that object has had some.
And then
Pangerbon is in there,
yeah, and then in the cart at the end, when they ride away into the west in the cart, there's all kinds of stuff in the cart, but Saoirse's shell is in there, hidden amongst all the trash. Also, Lord Protector's helmet is there, now used as a potted plant container.
Well, that's in keeping with a long tradition. If you look at the Silly Symphony of Ferdinand the Bull, the matadors are caricatures of some of the animators, and of course Walt,
like Freddie Moore and Walt, and there's a rat that looked like Walt Disney in one of the Mickeys and stuff. But Ross and I got put in as background characters, and most of the studio, Fede drew most of the people in the studio at some point in the background characters, which is cool, because I always hate when background characters become generic. I always think each background character should look interesting, because there's no like generic person in the world. Everybody has an interesting face. So I like that, yeah.
And Fede is a little bit similar to Tom in that when he does a caricature, sometimes it can be really insulting. So
but they're also
Fede used to take great delight in making these like ugly Kilkenny background characters.
He drew Charles.
And they were like, who's that? And they go, that's that person over there.
Yeah, well, I think you both turn up in a couple of places in the course.
Yeah. Inspiring me to grow a beard to cover half my face.
Another question someone asked: are there going to be prints from Wolfwalkers? Someone is clearly interested in getting.
Yeah, I'm working on that. I think there will be like the usual ones that we do in Cartoon Saloon, which are like all of that stuff has been so great as an alternate source of revenue for the studio, and we're kind of getting more and more into it. We've got besides your book, we've got the comics, and so I think there will be prints. But what I'm more excited about is trying to get some kind of Mondo style, guest artists from the studio to do various, like Clara, one of the concept artists, is an amazing woodblock print, and if she could make some limited prints of Wolfwalkers, like she made one for Ross and I, and I'd love to offer. Like, it's so neat, isn't it? And like if we could offer a few more of those and stuff, I think that kind of like high quality limited edition stuff rather than cheap kind of plastic merchandise would be in keeping with the studio. So I'd love to do that, but hopefully we can.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, so we're just seeing a message. We want it. So I'd like to thank Tom and Ross. It's getting late there. How late? What time is it in Ireland now?
It's about 11 o'clock, but I'm onto the whiskey now. I started on wine and I'm mixing the grain in the grape, so I should stop before I start babbling.
So we thank you both for coming to this and for making such a beautiful film. And Ben, thank you for hosting and giving us the opportunity to talk.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Charles, and thanks, Ben.
Yeah. And yeah, it feels like we could go on for another hour. There's some great questions there in the chat and we can't get to them, but yeah, we have to wrap it up. Thanks to everyone. Thanks for all the participants for hanging on.
We need good pints for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If we can all meet up in a pub in 2021,
I'll give you a recommendation if you like. This West Cork whiskey is actually very good, you know, and I never had it before, but I'm polishing off a bottle through doing all this press at night.
Though I'm not the whiskey drinker in the house.
Scott, well, tell him that he'd like the West Cork. Yeah.
I'm the lightweight. So yeah, thank you. Does this wrap us up?
Yes. Be sure to check out the film if you haven't already.
Well, of course.
I'd be surprised if you guys are here and you haven't checked out the film. Just to reiterate, we will have the recording sent out to everyone in about a week or two. So, yep. And with that, I want to thank you guys and look forward to having you guys on again.
I'm always happy to talk to these gentlemen. So
honored to be included in Gallery Nucleus. It's very famous amongst animation fans. So thank you.
Thank you.